Hi, my name is Jennifer Lewis from Small Food Business, and today I'm going to show you how to use Small Food Business Food Product Cost and Pricing Worksheet. And this was designed because I had a lot of food entrepreneurs telling me that they didn't have accurate costs on their products, or they didn't know how to accurately cost out their products. And so sometimes they would find that their prices were actually lower than what their product costs were. And of course, that's the quickest way to go out of business, is by having prices that are lower than your costs. So this spreadsheet is designed to do all of that math for you and to make it as easy as possible for you to determine what your costs are and then to figure out what your prices should be. So when you download the spreadsheet from the Small Food Business website, this is an Excel spreadsheet. Now this can be used on either a PC or a Mac, as long as your Mac has Excel on it. So first thing you will do, this is the introduction or the instruction page. This would be the first page that you open. And then you see here in the second tab, we have an example worksheet. And so this is actually the example we're going to work through. We're going to work through it in the next worksheet. But this is an example spreadsheet to sort of give you an idea as you go back and forth developing your recipes, how this needs to look. So now let's jump in. We're going to pretend that you have your recipe and you need to be inputting the information into this spreadsheet to determine what your costs are. So the first thing to know about this spreadsheet, before you dive into it, what you really should do, if you haven't done so already, is make sure that all of your recipes, if you have your recipes designed in cups and teaspoons, actually convert those over to weight measurements. And it doesn't matter whether it's grams or ounces, but convert everything over to weight measurement. And the reason for that is really twofold. One is that it's actually going to make costing out your product significantly easier. If I ask you, you have a 5-pound bag of flour, you're able to say, well, that has 5 pounds, since there are 16 ounces in a pound, that has 60 ounces of flour in it. So I'm able to then determine, well, how much does 2 ounces of flour cost me? Versus if you give me 5 pounds of flour and you say, well, I have 2 cups, there's not an easy conversion between cups and weight measurement like ounces or pounds or grams. So first thing you want to do is get a kitchen scale if you don't already have one, and go through and convert all your recipes. The other reason this is a really good idea is actually because as you start to scale up your recipes, your quality is going to be maintained if your recipes were done out in weight measurement. If you can imagine, every time you scoop out, let's say, a cup of flour, in each of that cup, technically there's a little bit of air differential. So in one cup you might have more air, in another cup you might have less air. And over time, if you're going to scale that recipe up, let's say 100 times, the difference there is actually going to have a huge impact on the quality of your product when it comes out, because you're going to either have much less flour than you need to, or you're going to have significantly more flour than you need to. So really, moving all your recipes to weights is the first step that you want to take. And in a commercial kitchen, in a professional kitchen, and in hotel and restaurants, everything is done by weights. It's not done by cups and teaspoons. So now that you've done that, you're getting to your first recipe here. And the other thing that you need to know about this spreadsheet is that all the orange cells, those are the cells that you can go in and you can change data and manipulate, with the exception of just right under here under the ingredients, and I'll show you that in a second. But all of these other blue cells, all of these other ones here, and all of the green cells, those are all locked. So those have formulas in them, and so they're locked so that you can't go in and mistakenly change something which would impact the entire spreadsheet as a whole. Okay, so we're ready to go in, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to build a recipe here for our Mama Bear's berry cookies, which was the sample or the example that you see here. So in your recipe, you can just go in right here and you can type in the name of the recipe. Okay, so now that's done. Now the recipe yield, this is how many, in this case, cookies, or how many products does this recipe yield? In this case, we're going to say that it yields 24, and this is the normal recipe. So if you're looking at, let's say, that recipe card, or you're looking at the recipe sheet that you have, the 1 times of that recipe, how much does it yield? The desired yield, you can also change this. Right now, let's say it might be 24. And so what I'm saying there is that I'm actually not changing the recipe at all. I'm going to say, well, the recipe originally yields 24 cookies, and I actually want to get 24 cookies out of it. So there's no differential there. However, let's say that after you've created this spreadsheet, you then come back, a month later, and you're like, wow, business is really booming. So I actually now need the recipe to yield 65 cookies instead of 24. Well, what happens is you see right here in this green cell, that number changed to 2.71. And what that does is it's actually going to help show you in the recipe itself how much of each ingredient you need to be able to make that recipe to yield that much, that many cookies in this case. So I'll show you that after we build in the ingredients so that you can see that at work. But right now we're going to keep this at 24. So then you go through and you want to put in your recipes. So or your ingredients. So we're going to start. I've got my all-purpose flour, and I'm going to put in here in ounces. So this is the important thing to know. Remember how we talked about all your recipes should be in weight measurement? Well, what you don't want to say is that you don't want to say, oh, well, this is 5 pounds. And let's say I'm only going to use 2 ounces of it. You need to make sure that if you're going to be saying I'm using ounces in the recipe, that the total quantity that you put in is in that same unit of measurement. And again, it doesn't matter if it's grams or ounces. It doesn't matter if you switch back and forth between grams and ounces on different ingredients. But within this same line here, so within line 7 for the all-purpose flour, I need to make sure that the total quantity I'm putting in is going to be in the same denomination that the units in original recipe will be. So for example, in this case, I am going to say that this is 400 ounces of flour, and that 400 ounces of flour I'm actually buying for $13.99. So that's the cost that I'm paying. So I go to the store, I'm paying $13.99, and I'm buying 400 ounces of flour. And just so you know, the 400 ounces of flour, that comes from, I'm saying I'm buying a 25-pound bag of flour. And so 25 times 16, since there are 16 ounces in a pound, is what leaves me with the 400 ounces. So that's how I got to that number. So as you can see, I put in the 400 ounces and I put in the total price that I'm paying, and the spreadsheet automatically calculates for you what your per ounce or your per unit cost is. So in this case, I know that I'm paying 3.5 cents for every ounce of flour in the recipe. So now in this cell, you also need to go in and you need to say, well, how many ounces are there in the original recipe? And so I'm going to say that in the original recipe, there is 5.24 ounces of flour. The recipe, then if we'll skip over here to the ingredient cost, the spreadsheet then automatically calculates for me how much is this recipe costing me, or how much does the flour in this recipe cost me. Remember we talked about the difference between the recipe yield and the desired yield? So watch this cell right here. Watch what happens to it. We originally said that the recipe yield was 24 and the desired yield was 24. Well, if I go in and I change that back to that 65 like we talked about, well, now the spreadsheet is going to tell me that you need to have 14.2 ounces of flour. So that way you're able to say, well, do I have enough flour to make this recipe? Because the worst thing, we've all been there, you get partway into a recipe and you realize that you're running just a little bit shy on ingredients. So this will actually do the calculations for you. Plus you also now know, well, not only do I have enough flour, but now I know that I need to put 14.22 ounces of flour into the recipe in order to get my yield of 65. Now, as a note, your ingredient cost did not change. That's because the ingredient cost is based off of the original recipe yield. So then what you want to do is you want to go through and you want to put in the rest of your ingredients. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that right now. Okay, so as you can see here, we have all the ingredients inputted into the spreadsheet. And if you have extra spaces below your ingredients, don't worry about those. Those won't impact your calculations at all. So now you might have noticed that in filling all of these ingredients out, Over here in our per ingredient unit costs, some of these numbers have changed a little bit. So we're going to work through these per ingredient unit costs first, and then we're going to take a look at the packaging component of your recipe. So first things first, up here you might also want to input the name. The reason is that the spreadsheet is designed so that it can actually be printed out and you can read it. So if you want to print this out and put this into a notebook somewhere, this will print out. So right here, this will print out as one page and this next will print out as another page. So that might be why you want to include the recipe name on the top of this one as well. So this top cell, this batch ingredient cost, well, this is the calculations based off of the information that you've put into the spreadsheet thus far for all your ingredients. So it is adding up all your ingredient costs, and it's figuring out, in order for you to make this recipe, to make the normal recipe yield 24 cookies, it's going to cost you, in this case, $3.67. But we need to add in how much time it's going to take you to make the recipe as well. So what you want to do in here is you want to time yourself, see how long it's going to take you to create this recipe, and we're going to say, okay, it's 35 minutes in this case. So you can put in whatever number you want here. Then you also need to add in how much you would pay or how much you want to be paid, sort of the hourly rate. In this case, we're going to say it's $11.50 for you or for somebody else to make this recipe. So we're saying $11.50 and it's taking 35 minutes to make the recipe. The original recipe yield is 24. This should automatically carry over. So it's now telling us that the per piece cost is 43 cents. So I know that my ingredients and my labor, that this recipe is costing me 43 cents to make. However, in some cases, you are going to be selling these let's say these cookies individually, and sometimes you might be putting them into a bag with other cookies. So what you need to do here is you need to say, okay, I'm either going to sell them individually, and then it will give you your total ingredient cost. So it's going to tell you, okay, one package of cookies for the ingredients and the labor in that cookies, how much is that going to cost you? Or again, you can change this. If I'm going to say, well, I'm going to sell these in a bag with 3 cookies, then I can change this to 3, and that's then going to change what my total ingredient cost is for this item. Now that that piece is complete, let's take a look at the packaging. Now you may actually, depending on how your products are sold, you might not actually have any packaging. So if you don't have any packaging for your products, you can avoid this step entirely. But if you do have packaging for your products, then you need to input here what that packaging is. And I'm also going to say that I'm including a sticker, and I'm buying those in packs of 100. I'm paying $14.99 for those, and I'm using 1 of those. Now, one place I see a lot of people make a mistake, so just be careful, is you don't want to say, well, you know, I'm making 65 units, therefore I'm going to need 65 of these bags. What we're looking for is how much do you need to package up 1 unit? Over here, again, the recipe is automatically, or the spreadsheet's automatically going to tell you how many bags you need or how many inches of ribbon you need in order to make and package the recipe. So by inputting your packaging here, then what happens is the spreadsheet automatically calculates for you what your packaging cost is for 1 package. However, how much time is it going to take you to package the product too? And we're going to say it's going to take 3 minutes to package this, and you can actually sit down and time yourself to see how long it takes you to package. And we would pay somebody $9 to package this. And so now the spreadsheet calculates for you what your total packaging cost is, and then it adds your total ingredient cost and will give you your per unit product cost. So right now we know that for 3 of these cookies, for the ingredient and labor of those 3 cookies, plus 1 bag, 1 4-inch of ribbon, 1 sticker, and the labor time included in the packaging, your total product cost is $2. So now we know that your labor, your ingredients, and your packaging all cost you $2 to make 1 unit of this product. Now, this does not take into account some of the other aspects of running your business, like your administrative costs or your marketing costs. Those are things that get built into the margin part of the spreadsheet. So moving over, you can see over here, the spreadsheet also is going to help you determine what your prices are. And this is based off of margin calculations. This is how the food business works. We take margins. Within those margins, we assume that it's going to cover our overhead and our marketing. And so ideally, you always want to have your margins as high as possible. In this tutorial, we're not going to talk about margins in depth or what margins you should use. There's a lot more information on the smallfoodbiz.com website about that. And in the wholesale book, the Getting on the Shelf book, there's significantly more information about that. But assuming that you have a firm idea of what you want your wholesale margins to be, you can input them here. Now the spreadsheet comes with these, the 60%, the 35%, 30%, 50%, and 5% already built in. But because these are orange cells, you can go ahead and you can change any of these. So let's say, for instance, that I actually want a wholesale margin of 65%. So I'll go in, I can change that. And you can see that what happens is it's actually going to change out your pricing entirely. And this is suggested pricing based off of your product cost and based off of the margins that you are hoping to get, how your product should be priced. So we're saying, for example, with 65% margins, you would charge $5.72 to sell these cookies at wholesale. And then if you look down here, that means that in order for your retailers to get a 50% margin, because that's what we have right here is a 50% margin, that they would need, the suggested retail price would need to be $11.43 for these cookies. And again, you can change this. You can go back and say, well, actually, I think my retailers are going to want a 40% margin. And you can see how that's then going to impact the suggested retail price. The last part of the spreadsheet that can help you is you might go through this entire equation and say, okay, this is great, but there's no way I can, have somebody pay $9.53 for 3 cookies in a bag. So you can go into here in this orange cell and you can say, actually, I want a retail price of, let's say, I want a retail price of $7.99. And then the spreadsheet will tell you, well, in order to have a retail price, a suggested retail price of $7.99, assuming that these margins, that you're holding these margins constant, well, then in that case, your wholesale price needs to be $4.79 and your product cost should be $1.69. So this enables you to do one of two things. First is you can say, okay, if I feel comfortable with my margins, I can then take this $1.68, this where it's telling me that my product cost should be $1.68, and I can go back and I can see how can I revise my recipe so that I can get my cost down to this $1.68. Alternatively, you might say, well, in order to have a retail price point of this, maybe I need to change up some of my margins. So maybe I actually need to change my distributor margin to 50%. And then all of a sudden, you see how that jumps. With a distributor margin of 50%, then my wholesale price should be $4.79, and then my product cost should be $2.40. Well, in that case, I'm golden. I'm already there because my product cost is $2. So you can see how you can use the spreadsheet to not only help you figure out what your current product costs are, including your labor, your packaging, and your ingredients, but then it can also help you determine what your pricing should be based off of ideal margins. And then if that pricing is not where you want it to be, the spreadsheet will also help you calculate, well, should I go back and should I revise my product cost? Should I look at my recipe and see how I can bring that cost down? Or should I take a look at the margins that I'm shooting for, and do I need to make revisions to those margins? So hopefully you will find this spreadsheet helpful to you as you go about inputting your recipes. There are a number of additional blank recipes here that you can go in. There are 10 in total, so you can go in and put in additional recipes. If you have more than 10 recipes, let me know and I can make some extra copies and send that over to you. The last point I want to bring up is that this spreadsheet here is done in US dollars. However, on the Small Food Biz site, you can buy a spreadsheet that uses euros. You can also buy one that uses British pounds. However, the thing is, truthfully, that the currency symbol isn't really important because this spreadsheet is not actually doing any currency conversion for you. So if you wanted to, let's say, have Egyptian pounds, you could buy this dollar spreadsheet. You could buy the US dollar one, and then you just put in your prices. You don't make any conversions. You put in your prices as you're buying them, and then you just remember, okay, going forward, when it's telling me that my product cost is $2, well, in reality, it's telling me that my product cost is 2 Egyptian pounds. I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and I hope you find the tool itself helpful, as well as the smallfoodbiz.com website. Thanks.